Here with this week's hottest stories in the investment world, this is Zacks Friday Finish Line.
Hello and welcome to the Zacks Friday Finish Line. I'm Ryan McQueeney, a content writer here at Zacks, along with one of our editors, Maddy Johnson.
Hello. Today is Friday, April 21st, and we're here to recap this week's biggest stories from the investment and financial world. Well, it finally feels like springtime because my allergies are absolutely just terrible. I don't know. Do you have springtime allergies, Ryan?
A little bit. Not awful, but I'm not feeling 100%, although the weather is nice.
Yeah, I visited my parents over Easter, and they live out near Rockford, and obviously they have a lot more trees in Rockford than they do in downtown Chicago. So I'm apparently allergic to tree pollen because I could barely open my eyes.
Yeah, I don't do trees.
But anyways, there has been a plethora of earnings reports coming in, and we have had quite the busy week here at Zacks.
Yeah, and before we get into the big financial stories, we have to mention this week's mega headline, which is Fox News firing Bill O'Reilly.
Hashtag O'Reilly out.
After the New York Times broke a story about the $13 million that Fox has shelled out over the years to settle sexual harassment suits against the host of The O'Reilly Factor, the company finally decided to part ways with one of cable TV's biggest names. I think that's fair to say.
Oh, yeah. He was the biggest thing in cable news for the past 20 years. Yeah, so this is coming in the wake of nearly 50 advertisers pulling their ads from his show. And to tie in some facts for our investors out there, the O'Reilly Factor brought in roughly $110.8 million in ad revenue last year. And Fox News makes up about 10% of 21st Century Fox's total revenue. So the ticker there is FOXA, F-O-X-A. But Ryan, as you mentioned, too many earnings reports to count this week, so we got to move on, unfortunately, from this juicy gossip. So bank earnings, there was a lot of bank earnings earlier this week.
Yeah.
So after solid reports from JP Morgan Chase and Citigroup last week, we had quite the interesting slew of reports from some other big financials this week. So let's start with Bank of America, and the ticker there is BAC, which reported on Tuesday. The company posted revenues of $22.248 billion, which outpaced our estimate of $21.540 billion, and earnings of 45 cents per share, which beat our Zacks estimate of 35 cents per share.
Cool, yeah. So in the more investment banking side of things, Morgan Stanley also reported this week. Before the market opened on Wednesday, to be specific, Morgan Stanley posted earnings of $1 per share, which comfortably surpassed the Zacks consensus estimate of 90 cents per share. Quarterly revenues also surpassed our expectations. The bank reported $9.7 billion in revenue this quarter, beating our consensus estimate of $9.1 billion. Staying on this trend of investment banking giants, Goldman Sachs was up this week as well. Goldman Sachs, not a great quarter in the face of a bunch of other solid reports in the banking world. So Goldman Sachs posted earnings of $5.15 per share. While this was nearly double that of the year ago quarter, it fell well below our Zacks consensus estimate of $5.38 per share.
Ooh, yikes.
Revenues also came in below our expectations with a reported $8.026 billion, coming in below our consensus estimate of $8.368 billion. Now, yikes is definitely right for Goldman Sachs. The big story here is Goldman's weak quarter, which it played on a less volatile market that produced slower client activity. Makes sense. Trading revenues were simply not as high as analysts expected. Fair enough. We all have weak quarters. However, if this were a market-wide thing, we would expect some of the same trends to kind of apply throughout the banking industry, especially because Goldman is such a leader in this bond and fixed income trading area. And it was really interesting because out of all these big banks, Goldman was the one that struggled with bond and fixed income trading this quarter. So in that specific segment, Goldman Sachs posted a 1% gain, which got blown out of the water by basically all of its big competitors. For example, Bank of America saw fixed income trading revenue grow by 29% in the quarter. Morgan Stanley, their institutional securities segment, gained 39%. That bump was largely a result of this fixed income trading revenue as well. So interesting thing to note there, a lot of strength in the financial world of things, but Goldman Sachs a weak quarter for sure. And speaking of people who have had a weak go of it recently, I think that would be a huge understatement. We're going to pivot now to some earnings news from United Airlines.
Yeah. So United, as you all know, the company that has been plagued by a PR nightmare after a video recently went viral that showed a customer being dragged off flight 3411 that was overbooked. United reported its first quarter results on Monday.
I want to say, too, before we get into this was the viralest of all things that have ever been viral. I have never seen anything go viral as quickly and as just on such a wide scale. Every social media platform I use, all over Reddit, every website. I mean, we covered the story from an investor's perspective. There was a lot of volatility with United Airlines in the wake of this. It was all over CNN. There were millions of people just coming out like, I've also been kicked out of overbooked flights before. I mean, just squeezing the juice out of this story so much. But I personally was fascinated by the whole thing. But this was a viral sensation at its finest.
Oh, definitely. Like when I first saw the story, I don't know if this is bad, but I guess I didn't take it too seriously. But because I was like, oh, this is just another bad airline story. And maybe that's just the cynic in me.
Yeah.
But then it started to gain traction. Like the next day, I pulled up Google News, just like I always do every morning. The front headline, like the top headline, was this. Mm-hmm. And then just days, the whole week, it was the aftermath of this. Mm-hmm. It was an exponential viral sensation.
Mm-hmm. And it was mentioned in the earnings report. Yeah, so let's get into the earnings results.
So the company posted diluted earnings of 41 cents per share, and that surpassed the Zacks estimate of 37 cents per share. Net income came in at $129 million. The company saw revenue figures of $8.4 billion, topping our estimate of $8.362 billion, and also increasing 2.7% year over year. First quarter consolidated passenger revenue per available seat mile, and this is the all-important PRASM. I really like that.
Yeah, I do too.
What's that called? The
acronym.
PRASM.
There you go.
Metric for airliners was flat year over year, but looking ahead, the company expects second quarter PRASM to be up 1% to 3%. And United generated $547 million in operating cash flow and ended Q1 with $6.4 billion in unrestricted liquidity. Now, from United CEO Oscar Munoz on the whole PR nightmare, quote, "It is obvious from recent experiences that we need to do much better. We need to do a much better job serving our customers," end quote. The quote was longer in the PR release, but this is kind of
that's an abridged version. He definitely gets into a little bit more specific of an apology and
his it's typical, as investors know, to have a quote from the president or CEO of the company. This quote from Munoz, the scandal was the first thing that he talked about in his quote. And it was almost the only thing that he talked about in his quote.
Yeah, reading through a lot of earnings reports, you normally get we had such a lovely quarter and we're really excited about the future and executing
even
our
if
strategy.
They had a bad quarter, they, spinning the bad stuff into good.
And you very rarely see a CEO comment on a current news event like this. So it was really, really interesting to see.
Yeah. UAL stock was basically flat all week. Kind of bounced back a little bit from the plunge it took after the scandal.
Mm-hmm. Definitely has bounced back since then. And because I think that at the end of the day, especially with airliners, there are a lot of investors who focus very strongly on that industry, and they're more concerned with these metrics like our favorite little PRASM acronym. Okay, I want to move on to what I think was the biggest earnings story this week, and that comes from video streaming giant Netflix, who reported after the bell on Monday. The company posted earnings of 40 cents per share, beating our consensus estimate of 38 cents per share. However, revenue figures of $2.637 billion just missed our consensus estimate of $2.641 billion. Operating income in the quarter grew more than 5 times year over year to $257 million, while operating margin increased 720 basis points to 9.7%. The streaming service reached 98.75 million total members in the quarter. Netflix now has about 50.85 million total domestic members and 47.89 million international members. However, this 98.75 total subscribers figure fell just short of the 99 million members that the company had guided for in its previous report. They did issue further guidance for the second quarter of fiscal 2017. The company now expects revenue of $2.755 billion and diluted earnings of 15 cents per share. This was a little bit sluggish. The current Zacks consensus estimate at the time of the report called for earnings of 23 cents per share and revenue of $2.77 billion. The prevailing kind of rhetoric from company management was that investors should start focusing on different measures other than, because for a long time, we've talked about this on the show in the past, I think, is this total subscriber figure, and the growth there is what people immediately look to on Netflix's earnings reports. So I wanted to read a quote from company management in their official shareholder letter, kind of explaining that the company would like us to start focusing on different things. Yes. So, quote, "For the last several years, we've had flat operating margins due to established markets funding international expansion with every spare dollar we had." The company continued, "The major indicators of our progress were member and revenue growth and U.S. contribution margins. Starting this year, we can be primarily measured by revenue growth and global operating margins as our primary metrics." Obviously, we talked about, I just mentioned the kind of insane growth in operating income and margins this year. So they're on to something there. They're not making that up. Whether investors will listen is a different thing. Shares of Netflix are down about 4% since the release of the report. So, Maddy, I'm going to ask you kind of that lingering question, which is, are we buying what Netflix is putting down? In other words, is it time for us to move past these subscriber numbers and focus on other things?
Well, we're certainly buying what Adam Sandler is putting out.
Oh, no.
Because that deal of his with Netflix, that's gonna be a huge money-making potential. I mean, it is already a huge money-making thing for Netflix.
Sure. I mean, definitely speaking to one element of the kind of attracting people with their original programming, which is where the appeal is coming from now, for sure. I personally can't speak for it because I'm not a huge Adam Sandler guy.
I'm not an Adam Sandler fan either, but millions of other people are.
That's true.
But then you also have to look at Netflix's other partnerships, let's say with like Chelsea Handler and Dave Chappelle and Louis C.K. And I don't know if you can really call them partnerships, but they certainly have like partnered with Netflix to debut their brand new comedy specials.
Sure.
Exclusively on Netflix.
Oh yeah.
So will like these 3 high profile comedians, I mean, how much money will they be able to make for Netflix over the coming years? How much more, I guess, money can Netflix bring in with original content? Because Netflix isn't really,
But that's the thing though, is that's like these comedians, the deals that these comedians have, Adam Sandler's film deal, any of the original programming that they produce, isn't the money-making ability of all those shows and programs contingent on their ability to bring in new customers? Because which would then speak to we're still looking for subscriber growth on some
I mean,
level.
sure. Sure. There's expanding into new countries, but how many more countries can they expand into?
Yeah, they're basically done. They're in every country that they can operate in for the most part.
Yeah.
Which I think is the point they're trying to bring up with this quote is we have good margins domestically. The issue with our international margins is it costs us a ton of money to be breaking into all of these new markets. Now we're kind of done with that, so things should level out a little bit, which makes sense.
Yeah.
I think in the world that this is, video streaming is certainly its own kind of niche little tech market, but almost every emerging tech market has very hard upfront costs when you talk about expansion. So
definitely. I mean, original content in general comes with high costs. It's not cheap to produce the TV that we've become accustomed to, like the type of television shows that we've become accustomed to. I mean, as you know, we're in this golden era of television. Netflix is competing with Amazon and Hulu, and especially with HBO, the shows on HBO and the shows on FX, that network. I don't know off the top of my head what company owns FX, but for Netflix to compete with that type of content is hard because, I mean, let's be honest, in my opinion, Netflix's content is not really up to par with a lot of what its competitors are putting out.
Okay. That's, I think, fair enough.
Consistently, on a consistent basis.
That again, I won't necessarily dig into that much because I would tend to agree with you. Although, you know, the Adam Sandlers of the world have their fans, and the other three comedians that you cited.
Sure, but then you also have to think, what type of content company is Netflix trying to be? Is it trying to be an Adam Sandler movie company, or is it trying to be an award-winning television company?
True.
What is the money? Like, what avenue is the money going to come from?
Yeah, and also, what's the most efficient thing from a company's perspective? Because if they want us to focus on margins and they're going to improve their profit margins in the years to come, is going out and producing content that's going to be, and not to say that they haven't already gotten some Emmy nods, because they've gotten their nominations, that's for sure, but is producing that type of high quality, award-winning, critically acclaimed type of content going to be a little bit more expensive at times than maybe toss Adam Sandler a few $1 million and see what he can come up with on like a B level budget, and people are going to watch it who are Sandler fans because they're Sandler fans. I mean, maybe that's a better, more efficient route. And I mean, they did that deal with Adam Sandler, so that's certainly an example of taking some sort of direction there. I will say, what kind of content company do they want to be? Stand-up specials are certainly not that expensive to produce, and
that's a good point.
Production cost-wise, you're talking more about, from Netflix perspective, inking the contract with the comedian to keep them pumping out Netflix exclusive specials. So if Netflix wants to make its niche stand-up specials, which it, in my mind, kind of already has, it's one of the best. I mean, HBO used to be the comedy king, anymore. But yeah, I would say Netflix is really on top of that ladder right now. But yeah, I think I follow the management's logic to an extent. It's just, if you want to talk about growing revenue at any point, you can't simultaneously say we're eventually going to hit a plateau of new subscribers, but keep growing revenue unless there's going to be price increases, or unless there's going to be new types of plans, new levels of plans, or a different way to pay, and different things to pay for than Netflix is currently set up. So unless you're going to change the product a little bit, I kind of hit a wall with the logic to some point. Now, profit margins, you can certainly keep improving. There are ways to get more efficient. That totally makes sense to me. But as far as changing up the product in years to come, and this is something that they, I think, specifically addressed this week, saying that they weren't for the time being interested in, and that's live events. In my mind, I'm looking at Amazon's media department getting into live events. I'm looking at
like what?
They just signed the NFL deal, the Thursday night
live. Okay.
Like literally like live things, sports events could be an example. I think Netflix push into sports. To me, that seems like it's inevitable. Like, yes, it's not currently a short-term goal for the company, but if Amazon's gonna do it, if that's where these over-the-top streaming services are going.
But is it Amazon doing it through a subsidiary?
Well, I mean, it's a Prime exclusive, that's for sure. But on some,
okay.
So that's what I'm saying though, is at some point, if you don't want us to focus on subscriber growth, doesn't it? It seems like the product has to change a little bit then to get us focused elsewhere. And
I agree with that.
So,
but like
personally, I would like to see live events. I would like to see a small shift in the product into that world of things. Netflix has said it's not a goal right now, so they're clearly not listening to me and my thoughts in my head. But it seems like that's where the streaming world is going eventually.
Sure, but then you also, I mean,
that costs a lot of money.
That costs a lot of money, and then Facebook and Twitter, or not Twitter, but Facebook becomes a competitor now.
True. Yeah. And it didn't, the whole streaming the Thursday night game didn't go
Facebook
too
obviously
hot
does not have a problem growing their user base, unlike
Twitter.
Netflix and Twitter.
And that's not even to say necessarily that Netflix has hit that plateau or that plateau is coming up anytime soon. This was slightly disappointing as far as total subscriber growth goes. And they did project that they'll be crossing over into the triple digit subscribers threshold soon.
I wouldn't be surprised.
So we can maybe throw them a party when that happens.
I mean, I guess you have to look at like high profile international markets like India, like, I mean, all of Southeast Asia, I feel like are just a burgeoning, just ready to, explode with user growth.
And that's actually a really good point too, is how much does Netflix care about and how much are they willing to invest in helping some of these emerging markets that they're in improve accessibility to their own product. I know with Facebook, Zuckerberg is all over bringing the internet to developing countries, trying to launch satellites and drones and whatnot to bring Wi-Fi to certain areas. And sure, that seems philanthropic because the internet, I think, is slowly becoming a basic human right. And he can certainly pitch that as a philanthropic idea, but it also totally makes sense that the owner of Facebook would want, or the CEO of Facebook and the founder of Facebook would want more people to have the internet so that they can have access to Facebook. So how much does that impact Netflix in those emerging markets too? Because the key to unlock a bunch of subscriber growth would be a bunch of new people being able to afford the thing that connects you to Netflix. So that is certainly a factor as well. But again, kind of seems like not a total goal if the goal now is improving margins, because that would cost a ton of money as well. So it'll be interesting to see where Netflix goes. I think that they're not quite at a turning point yet, but this is certainly them going, hey, the turning point's up there. Please pay attention. Don't get shocked when, our focus as a company starts to shift.
Right. So. And I think we can all agree that the best thing coming is the next season of House of Cards. Okay? So on that note.
And that's a critically acclaimed show.
It is. It has won many awards. And I'm
Uh-huh.
not saying that Netflix has never made award-winning shows.
Uh-huh.
They have in years past.
Yes.
Recently, not so much.
There are other media companies shooting a higher percentage as far as good and bad. That's what you're saying.
Yes, Netflix has not been so consistent.
Fair enough.
But
I'm not,
very excited for House of Cards.
I don't disagree with you on that critique. I haven't been even really keeping up with Netflix originals outside of the incredible comedy specials they've been putting out.
Yeah.
So, fair enough. I don't disagree, but to each their own on that matter. All right. I think that just about does it for us this week. If you have anything you'd like us to cover on the show, or if you felt like we missed something this week, feel free to shoot us an email at podcast@zacks.com. You can also check out all of our other exclusive audio content at zacks.com/podcasts. Subscribe to us on iTunes, which is now called Apple Podcasts, by the way. They changed the name on us within this past week. So if you're consuming on iTunes, it's now going by a different title. And leave us a rating if you enjoyed the show. Thank you, as always, for joining us, and we will see you next week.